Should have brought Hamish over. Yeah, it would have been a crowd pleaser.
Hi, everybody.
Oh my God, looks good.
Hi, everybody. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lucy, and on the behalf of everyone at Better Ed Than Dead, we are so excited to see you on Zoom to celebrate the release of Rick Morton's latest book on money. Rick is joined in conversation tonight by Bridie Jabour. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded, so if you would not like to be filmed, please turn off your camera settings. Before we begin the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. These will be different depending on where you're zooming in from. For me, it is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that Better Ed Than Dead is built. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We are joined tonight by Rick Morton. Rick is an award-winning journalist and the author of 100 Years of Dirt. Rick is currently the senior reporter for the Saturday paper. Originally from Queensland, Rick worked in Sydney, Hobart, Melbourne and Canberra as the social affairs writer for The Australian, with a particular focus on social policy, including the National Disability Insurance Scheme, aged care, the welfare system, religion and employment services. Rick is the winner of the 2013 Kennedy Award for Young Journalist of the Year and the 2017 Kennedy Award for Outstanding Columnist. He appears regularly on television, radio and panels discussing politics, the media, writing and social policy. Rick is joined in conversation tonight by Bridie Jabour. Bridie is an opinion editor at Guardian Australia. She has previously worked as a journalist for News Corp in Fairfax, where she has reported on social affairs, politics and regional issues. She has worked in the Canberra Press Gallery and was a reporter for Brisbane Times after starting her career at the Gold Coast Bulletin in Queensland. Bridie writes commentary on feminism, inequality and pop culture and appears regularly on The Drum, Triple J and ABC Radio Sydney. She's the author of the novel The Way Things Should Be. There will be a Q&A session towards the end. Please type any questions you may have for Rick into the group chat and he will answer them via video once the time comes. Without further ado, here is Bridie to kick things off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. This is the first time that I've done this kind of event, so excuse any awkwardness. We do have a live audience here as well.
They come around for dinner.
Of 3 people. So if you hear other people giggling and laughing and cheering us on, then that's what it is. Now, on money, Rick would say is about the psychology of money. I would say it's a book about how he grew up very poor and is now very terrible with money.
That's it in a nutshell.
It's dedicated to me. It really is. And all the people who have ever loaned him money. So Rick, what's the most amount that you've ever borrowed?
Oh, that's a good question. $3,000 in one hit for bond to move into a new place, which I didn't have on me at all. And this sounds terrible and I won't name them, but it was like one of 2 people that I knew that just had it and that would be okay with giving it to me for just a week. Like I gave it back to them within a week.
You always repay very quickly.
Yeah, it's just like it's a temporary thing. I always run out at the end of every pay cycle, and then I have to cover the gap. So yeah, that was the most amount from one person at one time. But I reckon Candace, who's here tonight, is the winner for most amount of money loaned over quite a long period of time, like a decade, really.
You know that I loaned you $5,000 last year. And you don't even remember.
Oh my God, you did too.
It's fine, you paid it back.
Sorry, yeah. I did pay it back. I mean, I guess that's now I feel really embarrassed. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine, we'll move on. So we've been friends a very, very long time. When we were at uni, we were both one of the very few students who did not come from wealthy backgrounds. And we were at a very wealthy university, Bond University. We were both on scholarship there. And together, I remember going with you at midnight on payday to an ATM so you could withdraw your entire week's pay so that the payments to your debt collector wouldn't come out.
Yep.
And you would just have the cash for the rest of the week. I remember going to the casino with you on payday and watching you gamble all of that cash before you'd even paid your rent.
Yep.
I remember us taking turns asking our mothers for $20.
Who were not
well off at all.
Not well off at all.
And especially your mother. Your mother was a single mother. My mum just had too many children. And we'd take turns asking them for $20, and then we would share it and buy. That was back in the day when you could get Mackers and a pack of ciggies for $20.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was worse than you, obviously, but we were together, not the greatest, like as a pack. But I was, I just wanted to live. Like I felt like I'd got out of home and I'd got to this new place where the world was opening up to me, and I was, around people who I'd never met, and I was working for the first time, and I just wanted to do what everyone else was doing. But I very quickly learned that I was nowhere near that level, and that I was in structural poverty still. And I just had not just no capacity, but no willingness to engage with trying to sort that out, because it felt unfair. I'm like, I just want to have fun.
And you know that now. Look, you can articulate that now that you were in structural poverty. Is that really what you thought at the time, though, as a 19-year-old?
Look, I had no idea. I knew, like, when we got to university, it was the first time I'd ever come up against people with real money. And I really understood that I'd come from quite, like, nothing. But I personally didn't feel poor. I just felt broke. And there is a difference. And it wasn't really until much later on that I started to think, it was like, well, I think a lot of my choices were curtailed, or I felt more trapped than I knew how to articulate, because there was no one there to save me when I messed up, which I did many times, except all of my friends who themselves were not wealthy. So, I'd be like borrowing $20 from someone who was liquid 1 week, and then paying it back, and then having to borrow $20 from someone completely different. I always made sure not to go to the same person, if I could, in a row, because it was just too demoralizing and embarrassing for me.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception about money?
I don't think people... the reason I wanted to write this book was because I don't think people really understand what happens to your mind when you leave poverty as a child who witnessed that growing up. And because it's different if you're in the teeth of it yourself. If you're a single mum like my mum, who had to raise 3 kids, she didn't really have a choice but to just get on with things and make every dollar count. But when I went into the world unencumbered, I had kind of watched her do all of that and had hated every minute of it because it stressed me out. I can't even imagine what it was like for her. And I think the wiring in my brain was just broken because of it. And rather than actually deal with the circumstances I was in, I had this kind of faulty way of coping, which was to just spend everything because it could all be gone tomorrow and I could be destitute tomorrow. And I know what that looks like and I don't want to be there. So I've got cash for the time being. I might as well spend it and have a good time. In hindsight, I was not having the best time. Like, we had some great times together, but like I was deeply unhappy and also wasn't progressing as a person. Like, I just had no way of dealing with that.
What made you start being able to deal with it?
Well, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure that I've currently got those abilities. I think, it took me up until like even just a couple of years ago, I was still borrowing money to make rent from friends like Candace. That yours was different now that I remember it. That was for my mum's birthday trip, wasn't it? Yes. And so I just, I earned more money as time went on. And that helped to paper over some of the structural flaws in my own thinking and my way of coping. But there was a point where I guess it wasn't encouraging me to deal with the underlying kind of issues. If I had the money, I spent it. I still haven't saved anything. I'm 33. I've literally never saved a cent since I left high school. I had $2,000 in my bank account when I left high school, and I had to pay it all on a bill pretty much within months of leaving home. And I was just turned 18, and I haven't had money in the bank since. So I just lived paycheck to paycheck, and I'm still like that now, because now I've got, this is what I'm trying to get people to understand, I think, more about the way of thinking about things. Because I was always used to having no money in my bank account. Like, it was either zero or way down here in negative territory. So now when I remember when I got my book advance for the next book that's coming out after this, and it was a sizable chunk of money and more than I'd ever seen in my account at any one time. And I looked at it and I felt physically sick, like physically sick. I'm like, I have to get rid of this.
You sent me a screenshot that night of your bank account on your banking account app. It has like a graph where your money goes up and down. And that night, like 11 p.m, you sent me a screenshot of the line just going, it's like this,
It was
flat or long,
flatlining
and then
at
it's
zero. I had $0 in my, actually it might have been 28 cents in my bank account. Because up until that point, I always knew how much money I had in my bank, no matter what day of the week it was. Or more to the point, I knew how much the gap was that I had to make up when the bills came in. And then, yeah, that hit, and it was insane. Like, it was just ridiculous. And I remember when my agent was calling me about doing the deal, when the bidding process was happening with the publishers, like I was just walking around my living room. I was still in Canberra at the time, just going, what the hell just happened? Like, it felt like I'd won the lottery. And you hear all these stories about people who come from nothing, who win the lotto, and bad things happen to them. Like, only bad things. Like, they waste it all on like 10 Ford trucks for people they don't love, or they get a drug addiction, or they just can't cope. And I have a very mild version of that still, where like I got that money and I'm like, it has to go. It's like a Rugs a Million sale. I'm like, at these prices, it'll be walking out the door.
I remember you bought the gold vacuum cleaner, and I was like, I walked in, I'm like, how much is this vacuum cleaner? And it was like, what, $1,200?
$1,200. It was on a Black Friday sale.
And I said, why did you get this one? There are other ones that aren't gold that are like cheaper and just as good. And you're like, no, I needed the most expensive one. I need to get rid of this.
Yeah. Well, like, we're having, and this sounds so gauche now. Like, I hate myself for it. But like, remember, there's like an antique store underneath the apartment I live in, and it's actually really good. But I didn't know it existed until a friend told me about it. And so I went down there, and they had a cocktail cabinet, and I really liked it. So I'm like, how much is the cocktail cabinet? And they're like, $900. And I was telling you about it, and you're like, why do you need the cocktail cabinet? And I'm like, because I need to spend the money. And at this point, I'd renovated my mum's bathroom. I'd repaid you for the trip that you paid for to New Zealand for her birthday. And done.
You bought her a car.
I bought her a car for Christmas, and I brought my sister all these white goods, just because if I have it, it's not going to do any good, because structurally I still feel like I'm in that point where, like, what's the point in planning for a future that I'm not quite sure exists, if you know what I mean? Maybe you don't.
Do you think that you say that on money, that there is a part of you that just didn't think you were going to live past 30, and you weren't really planning to? This is also a big period of depression and complex PTSD for you as well.
Yeah.
Do you see a future now?
I do, to a degree. Like, I started for the first time, because I hadn't saved anything, I'd just kind of given up on the idea of owning a home. And for the first time in the last year, I started like actually turning my attention to it and being like, oh, maybe I could if I actually put some of this away. But I'm 33, and that thought had just literally never occurred to me. Like, I had resigned myself. And this is what sucks about this, because like, it wasn't because the system protected me or my mum to the degree that it should have. We were lucky to have what we did get. But when you're done with that, when you're flung out into the world and your mum's still in poverty, and you're just this kid on a cadet wage as a baby journalist on the Gold Coast, who's from the country, who thought a reading cinema was a subtitle cinema up until the age of 18. We had no idea how the world worked. And that's when you get trapped, because kids are incredibly resilient. And like, a lot of this kind of, I guess a lot of the baking was done when I was in high school and primary school, but I wasn't aware of what the final product looked like until I got out into the world. And I was like, holy crap, I thought I was making scones and I've got a brick. Like, I'm just totally incapable of making these decisions or learning how finance works. And that's the other thing about growing up in the way that we did. You're not taught how to invest money or how to make money work for you. If you're from a middle-class family or a rich family, depending on your definitions, it's just, you absorb it via osmosis. Like, they do it for you. Or they do it for you. Yeah. I didn't even have a Dolomites account. I remember when I made it out of the cattle station, like in 15 hours west of Brisbane, got to a real primary school with 120 kids in it in Boona, and all the kids had these little banking accounts, which apparently is just a Commonwealth Bank scam to get little kids in the door and keep them for life. But I didn't know that at the time. They all had cool cartoon characters and did their banking every Wednesday or something like that. And I was like, I knew that I didn't have any money to put in the bank account, but I still wanted one. I'm like, can't I, like, I'll find 5 cents on the way to school. I'll put it in my bank account. And from that moment, basically, I was behind the system. I just had no idea. I remember they did teach us how to fill in a check. and a deposit.
Oh, what a useful
I know.
thing to know.
Didn't have to use that skill until I was like 27. I was like, what? But beyond that, I knew nothing about, just this kind of natural thing that people who come from those families understand. It's never necessarily taught explicitly. It's just the environment they live in. And kids like us don't have that. And we have to figure it out for ourselves amongst all of the other things that are going on in life.
And now you've thought a lot about this and money and poverty and how it's impacted, obviously, all facets of your life. You've written about it, obviously. You speak very eloquently about it. Do you still have shame around it?
Yes. I was never ashamed when I was a kid because mum, this is the other thing where luck comes into it, right? I spent my whole career now covering social affairs and kids who are in child protection or who are involved in the legal system in some way, shape or form, either had one or both parents abuse them or leave them, or who were just checked out mentally for very understandable problems of their own that are often caused in the cycle beforehand. And I still had a mum that loved me, like a lot. And she put in so much work to make sure that buffer zone was there. So even when we were, like when she was crying herself to sleep at night, which, she thought she could fake it to me. Like I heard her at night quite a lot. And often she let me in on a few of the other secrets, but for the most part, she bore that stress so that I didn't have to. I still knew it was happening. But without her, there are two forces in life. There's the resources that are brought to bear on your upbringing, and there's the love that's brought to bear. And I had her love. And without that, I definitely wouldn't be here. Like I barely made it as it was. Like I could have gone either way. My brother turned out, again, after much trauma, he was burned, he almost died. Our dad left us, not just left us, but froze the bank accounts. And my brother was really close to him. And my brother became an ice addict, a methamphetamine addict. And I honestly could have gone down that path. And it's not like I'm going to tell you now that I made a choice not to do that, because I didn't. I don't remember anything about making choices or not. I just did whatever, the eddies and currents told me to do, or where they took me. And it was just luck. Like I just ended up here because I'm lucky. And in some sense, I'm proud of that for what it's made me into. Like, I think it's made me a better person. It's taught me more things in terms of a kind of a scrappy fighting sense of being able to make it through, like that time we ate the chicken from the hotel. But, I guess shame's the wrong word, because there is no shame attached to it. That's something that comes from the top up. But I get angry on behalf of, my mum, who's still in that position, despite my best efforts, but also everyone who's in a situation like that. Because every time I read about it or write about it for work and interview people in the welfare system today, I just think back to when I was a kid and go, how would that have ruined our life? And it makes me really mad on their behalf. I try not to get mad personally anymore. I think I've dealt with that, I think. I try, anyhow.
It's interesting you keep talking about luck, because that is referred to a lot in this. I'm just going to get you to read this passage. It starts in mid-sentence, but I think it makes more sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
you can do that.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm capable of reading. Is everyone still with us? I actually have no sense of who's here, so I'm so sorry. All right, I'm going to read now. Many of us believe in the atomic truth of the proposals, that money measures worth and moral character. Those who have it don't just appear to be more important, they are more important. The effect is the same as gaining mass in the rising elevator, or time in the rocket ship traveling near the speed of light. But remember this, the importance is attached to the money, not the person. Most often these people are more easily listened to, more readily approved, and justifiably integral to society because they can buy the ears of those who would listen, purchase the things for which approval is given, and partake in the multiple transactions of modern life that make them so indispensable. It's the system what did it. It's my short version of that. I don't know.
That's really emotional, Rick. You read that so well.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't get to read much out loud anymore. My flatmate Seamus won't let me.
No, you do it a bit.
Oh, thank you. He's in the room also.
So what you're talking about here is a lot of people thinking that what they have in life is something that they've earned.
Oh God, yes.
And this goes for rich people as well as poor. Like rich people think that they've earned all that money and that they're a good person and there is moral value to it. But also the same thing happens in reverse with very poor people, where they can think that they deserve the life that they have and not realize all of the systems of an oppression that are in play for this. So you talk about luck, and there is luck. Obviously, there is a lot of luck involved. But we also do live in a society that have a lot of these oppressions built into the system.
Everywhere you look. And I had 1.5, I guess you could measure it that way. Like I was poor. I was gay in regional Queensland, which I think is a 0.5 on the kind of scale. But I don't have the other intersections either. So I didn't have a visible disability. I don't have the racial component of having to deal with my skin color on the outside and how that places me in a society. And so I'm acutely aware that I don't or can't speak for all of those people as well. But I think the one thing that it does teach you about being anywhere in the margins, whether you're a woman in a kind of patriarchal society or you're on the LGBTQI spectrum, it teaches you compassion, I think, for other people, or at least you put some effort in to try and understand how these many different devices in the system work together to keep you in your place. And with money, it's such a powerful, I think money and class more specifically, which is not just about money, has such explanatory power about the way the world works. And ironically is probably not the right word. If you want advice on that, don't ask me. But like, I never thought about these things in political theories. Like I never read any Marx or, Piketty's Capital or anything like that. Like I had no idea that these words existed when I was in school on account of my class. But I think I kind of imbibed it. And it took me a long time to realize what it was because, my mum's still in that position. And I look at the way she kind of acts and talks about these subjects with more understanding than almost anyone else in the world, but she wouldn't be able to tell you what any of the words are. But now we can say it out loud. We know what it is. It's oppression. It's, people are kept in their place and they're kept distracted by people below them on the ladder. And that's all part of the design. Like people make them fight for the scraps of what was on the table further up above. And it's a shitty system. And the fact that I'm here now is not because the system worked. It's because I got lucky. I think I talk about it in here, like the fallacy of the one who made it out. I cannot stand those people who come from those backgrounds like mine, who make it somewhere and then say, well, it was all me. And I'm like, you liar. I'm like, that is not true. It's just, the thing that in my first book, I thanked all of my primary school and high school teachers that I really gelled with. And they're just some examples. Like when we were in the workplace, we had some mentors early on in what was otherwise quite a den of like just people who were just doing their thing. And some of them were a bit mean, I guess. But there were people, the right adults at the right points in my life, I happened to meet them. And had I met the wrong people at the wrong moment, in any given year, it's a cumulative effect as well. If I hadn't met the people in the order I'd met them when I needed them the most, I wouldn't be here. If I hadn't been born with, for some reason, I don't know whether it was because I felt I was different because I was a weird little gay boy in regional Queensland, but I just had my head in a book, whereas my brother didn't. And that was just his nature. And so I had things that took me out of that world, like books, that my brother didn't have. And that's where the luck component comes into for everyone. And yeah, and rich people who say, I made this money, they know better than anyone that money works for itself. And all they have to do is harness it. So once you've got, it's like Gina Reinhardt. She's done very well recently, as I understand it. But she started with a lot of cash, like a lot of cash. I reckon I could make some money if I inherited that much money.
Even you.
Even me. I would spend a lot of it though.
So what do you think we need to change about the systems? We don't have to like overthrow everything tomorrow, as much as I see you edging towards that. Yeah. And love it. But
I've been radicalized by my own life experience. Who knew?
But what about the systems? Can we change, and do we need to change?
Yeah. Well, I think the first one is the hardest thing to change is the cultural perception that poor people are unworthy because they don't have anything. I don't know what changes that. Like, I need to stop saying ironically, but like access to people like that changes those perceptions. But of course, in a stratified society, you don't live cheek to jowl, which is why I like country people a lot, because you do get to see a cross section of everyone, and you understand them as people as well as statistics or demographic quintiles and all the rest of it. But funnily enough, the one thing that eases poverty is money. Like you can actually give people money and they're no longer poor. It's like magic. It really is. And we've got money. There are things, I talk about the welfare system, but particularly the punitive elements of the welfare system actually cost money to enforce. The biggest example is Job Active or Employment Services, which is $1.5 billion every year, or it's much more now. It's much closer to $2.5 billion, thanks to the pandemic, that thing that you may have heard of. But there are other, like, I can count on like two hands, I think, the number of times, even in the last 7 years, where the coalition government has tried to bring in a new compliance framework for people on welfare. And I remember they did it with the DSP, where it was meant to bring in the government, I think it was $15 million in the first year. And then they revised it in 6 months' time to say, actually, no, it's going to cost us $12 million to do it rather than make money. And then they revised it up saying, no, actually, it's going to cost us $17 million. So they actually spent money on this program that they thought was going to make them money by targeting disabled people. And then they tried it again with the compulsory medical checks with a government panel of doctors for people on the disability support pension, which caught 0.1%, I think, from memory, of people who were not, according to them, eligible for the DSP. And that thing cost a fortune. So, already, if you take all of those programs together, there's about $10 billion a year just sitting around if we trusted people with money. And some people are going to make stupid decisions with money, or at least they appear stupid to people who have come from the right backgrounds. But it's actually an incredibly rational choice for someone who has nothing to, if they get a windfall, if they get a tax return or an extra supplement from the government in times of crisis, it actually makes incredibly rational sense for them to go out and buy something that makes them feel good, because otherwise they just get worn down. And so, when people, particularly the conservative commentariat, say, oh, they can't be that poor, they've got a TV. And I'm like, do you have a TV? Like, does it make you feel good? That's what they're doing. They're trying to live. And if we got rid of that attitude, we could quite easily, as a nation, give some money to these people so they could live above the poverty line, and there wouldn't be any repercussions. It would make their lives much better, and it would do nothing to our own. We would not notice.
Well,
anyway,
and
getting worked up.
Also to be incredibly ruthless. Not only is it good for them to go out and spend their money how they want on their televisions and whatever makes them feel good, it's freaking good for the economy. There is actually like an economics.
Absolutely.
To giving people in the lowest.
As I'm not an expert in yacht buying, but when you buy a yacht, they typically come from overseas. Like, you always hear these stories about people who are like, oh, they've ordered a new yacht, which will be ready in 10 years, and it's coming from Mallorca or something. It's not great for the local economy, and they probably don't hire local people to work on them either, although I don't know. But we spend money, poor people spend money, because we've got a backlog of things we need to get done. Dental bills for the kids, lunches, excursions, things that make them feel like real citizens who have stuff to give. So yeah, give them money, they'll spend it. It's great.
So I hope that everyone is typing into the chat window their questions, because I'm going to throw to that very soon. But I just wanted to remind you all, if
bored of me.
If anything's seriously, I've heard it all before. No, I love it. But if anyone, I'm sure there is so much here that is very compelling and interesting for people, and I'm sure there are going to be questions, I can already tell. So just get into the chat window, and Lucy will be picking them up when we wind up. So just a couple more. You have a lot of studies in here and a lot of evidence in this for why you have to get rid of your money, when you say, like, why you've remained terrible with money in your adult life after having no money as a kid. But what's interesting to me is how you can go one of two ways, and your mother did not go that way.
No.
It's so different to your mother.
I do try and make a distinction though, because she never left poverty, but I did. And so I've gotten a hint of this in more recent times. So like for the last year, she's actually been better off financially than she's ever been since she had kids. And by no means is that wealthy. But she's just got like enough money to buy little trinkets and stuff like that. And guess what? She buys a lot of trinkets. Like she has bought so many chicken statues for her garden, like ridiculous amounts of chicken statues.
For her chicken garden.
Like way, she's actually got real chickens.
To keep the real chickens company.
Yeah. It's like if you don't count the inorganic material, there's actually 27 of them in addition to the real chickens. But like so, and I was actually thinking about this the other day because like, you know, to her, I think she's probably spent like $100 over the last 5 months. And like every time she has a little bit spare, she'll go out and buy an ornament because it makes her feel good. If she had more money, she would absolutely, I reckon, just be like, fuck it, let's blow it. Like,
you reckon?
Yeah, because it's just this pent up demand. Her whole life has just been set on Frozen. And, I think she's learning to spend at least a little bit more through me because I'm like, I have to remind her quite forcefully. I'm like, you don't have to worry anymore. Like, as long as my career goes okay over the next 40 years, we'll be okay.
In this booming industry that we work in.
What is a book? So I said to her, I'm like, if you want something done around the house, just tell me and like we'll make it work one way or the other. And so like she just asked me the other day, she's like, can I get the lino redone in the back room, which is where her cat's litter tray is. And I'm like, do you want something other than lino? Like, do you want wood? And mum is like, no, the lino's perfectly fine. So we got a guy in, got the lino redid. And she's like, I won't say that. I was going to say something.
No, you have to say it now. You have to say
I
it.
just imagine her being like, oh, girl, I got my lino did. And it just, so I think she's got a little bit of that kind of maladaptive behavior, but she's just never had a reason to let it out because she hasn't been able to. She hasn't had the choice. Whereas I kind of like the tethers came off and I was out in the world. I'm like, baby, I'm free. And then I went like that for 12 years. Even though like I progressively did okay in my career, it was the only thing I had keeping me stable. And in many respects to the detriment of other elements of my life, which are an unmitigated failure, just total disaster areas. So that, it's all we've got. And, I can see hints of it. Like my sister was home the other day and she just sent a photo to the family group chat of like these new doorknobs on a cabinet, like this old shitty cabinet in my mum's kitchen. And they're just like 2 roosters. And she's like, mum's got more, like the chicken klaxon sounded. Like, mum's gone out and bought more chicken things. So I'm like, well, she's doing okay then.
Do you think that you are ever going to change your habits? Or are you going to try to?
I'm going to try. I don't know if I want to talk about this, but like I got to a point recently where I'm like, I think, when I got the book things and I bought like a couple of things around the house that I wanted, like the Dyson, which I'd always wanted.
Dyson.
I never vacuumed until I got the Dyson. This is not a product placement thing. Sorry, God, what am I doing? But like, so I bought a couple of those things, which I'd always, I'm like, I reckon I would be better at chores if I had nicer things. And it's true. Like there's a false economy, which I witnessed with mum, like always buying a shitty vacuum, which broke because we had like 2 dogs and a cat and several budgerigars, and chickens. And at one point a rat. That was my brother's. And like this vacuum just, ironically, it sucked. It was not a good vacuum. And it just kept breaking. And now I'm just like, okay, false economy. I might as well get the thing that works. And I reached a point recently where I'm like, I think I'm done. Like, I think I got everything I wanted in terms of like those dumb things around the house. And then I sat back and I was like, oh, still not happy. Like I'm not, like that wasn't gonna fix me or fill whatever gap or void is somewhere in here. So yeah, I've got to do something else, I think. Like, as long as mum's happy, I'm happy. She was the reason, always the reason I wanted to actually earn money in the first place. Otherwise, I would have been quite happy being some bohemian artist who just kind of moved into the country. I wanted to make money and earn money so I could make her life comfortable in the years that she has left. And as long as I can do that, then everything else is kind of by the by. Still, a lot of people don't have to worry about that. So
well, you've done it as well.
Well, so far, so good.
You did it. It's great. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for all your honesty and still being so interesting after all these years.
That must have been hard for you to say.
I'm sure there's questions, so I'm just going to throw back to Lucy over at Better Read Than Dead.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions from Victoria. She asks, Rick, what do you think the long-term psychological effects are on individuals growing up in poverty?
I like that question. It's my favorite one. The hardest thing I think over the long term, and this is the stuff that the long tail is there for forever, really, is just we don't treat money as a real thing. Like, we see it as something that kind of pays bills and gets us out of tight situations and all the rest of it. But we almost don't. There's a really good example from a friend in the book who he came from nothing, married a woman who was from a middle-class family. And when they were moving, he had this jar of coins, would have been worth a couple of $100. And when they were moving, he was just like, she's like, are you going to take this to the bank to get it converted to cash? And he's like, I can't be bothered. Because you spend so long having to do things like that. Like in my case, having to scrounge every 5-cent piece, that when it got to a point in my life where I didn't need to do that anymore, not only did I not do it, but I actively avoided situations where I had change. So like if I've got change on me still to this day, I'll throw it at someone, not physically pelt it at them, but like give it to someone because I don't want it, because that's like a leftover of this time of stress and worry and concern about having to scrape things together. And that's the hardest thing to get rid of. Like the other day, it was only recently actually, this afternoon, I was trying to remember what this was. I went and bought an adapter so I could have 2 microphones on this laptop at Good Guys. And I went in there, and Good Guys is the kind of store that reminds me of my childhood. Like you'd go in there to like browse and be like, ooh, can't afford any of this, but wouldn't it be nice? And I saw someone in there, and I could be completely judging them, but they looked like a proper stereotype of a working class family, looking at a new washer dryer combo. And the guy and the mum, I assume, just looked so stressed, like just stressed. And I remember thinking, I'm like, I know what this felt like when I was a kid, and you're about to make a purchase that you need to make, but it's going to set you back, if not a year, multiple years, because there's a cascading effect. And so like I'm 33 and I haven't lived like that really for like the last decade. And it still triggered me. It's not quite the right word, but it still kind of gave me a flashback of the feeling of stress. And like that stuff hangs around for a long time, I think, if that helps. It probably doesn't help, but that's an answer.
Thank you. And we have another question asking, Rick, do you still consider yourself to be poor? And if not, when did you stop?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I struggle with this one because it's such a good question. Because no, I don't think I am. Even when I was in my mid-20s, I made the distinction. I'm like, I'm not poor anymore, but I am broke. But it gets more complicated when you get into our age, I guess, where we're starting to think about planning the future and buying a house if we can afford it. And you remember that you actually don't have any of the same structural advantages that other people have, which is, the thing that grinds my gears more than anything else is reading in normally the Sydney Morning Herald, but in many other papers, of people young millennials who were like, we bought our first home and we had no help from our parents. And I'm like, where is it? Where is it? Where's the fine print? And then you get like 20 pages down in the story and it says, we lived at home in our parents' North Shore mansion for 3 years, rent-free, and they went guarantor. And we don't got that. And it sounds like a jealousy thing, and it's not.
I'm jealous.
I love you for it though. You project that part of me that I just don't have, which is why we've always gotten along so well. But because if I was in that situation, I would avail myself of all of the opportunities. And even, a small thing is if you're a country kid at university in a city where none of your family lives, you've got to pay for everything yourself, pay for your rent yourself, and you don't get to live at home and have to, not worry about bills. And so those things always kind of bring me back to a point where I'm like, I'm not poor anymore. And I definitely could make some changes in my life that would, set me up, I guess, in a relatively comfortable way. But I'm also not, I don't feel like I'm quite there yet in terms of how my life needs to look. But again, like those things are things I can't change. And I don't blame people who are in those positions who have access to those things. All I ask is that they have a little bit of self-awareness about the fact that they are, you're not a hero. You didn't do it on your own.
You didn't do it on your own.
You didn't do it on your own.
And we have a question from Kate asking, Kate says that you're right, how you grew up with or without money affects your self-worth. It's the self-worth. If the self-worth is broken, it is hard to step up and out of poverty. This does not mean you are not valuable.
Oh, I love you, Kate.
And we have a question from Louise asking, how do you respond to the current Prime Minister's rhetoric, have a go to get a go?
A, doesn't make any sense as a sentence. Like, just it's not, what is a go? Are they the same goes? It's like grammatically it sucks. Ideologically it's awful, because, and I wrote a piece for The Guardian actually the other day where I was like, Anglicare put out their latest job snapshot that took data from May, and there were 106 job seekers applying for every entry-level job. 106, one job. So in the Prime Minister's kind of language, that's 106 goes had, one go received. Doesn't add up, doesn't compute. And it's just not helpful, because that is literally a version of all you need to do is work hard and you'll be fine. And it's just not true. It's not true, and it's not helpful to propagate that myth, because there are so many intersecting forces. And I've talked about a lot of them tonight. Like, do you meet the right adults who can support you along the way? Because it's not just about your parents. Do you get lucky in the right moments and in the right ways? Do you have access to an education? It's not just about whether you get to go to university, because everyone thinks that because we've brought in HECS, it's the great leveler. But if you talk about having to go to a university for the first time from a country town, you have to support yourself. Culturally, it's different. So all of these things add up. And this lovely lady called Kat rang into a radio station I was on yesterday, and she's from the country, very similar experience to mine, from the country, got to university in the city, had to work so hard just so she could pay her bills and live. And she had a breakdown. She couldn't do it. And now she's had to move back to a country town. She burst into tears on the phone. And her degree has been put off by 4 years, because now she has to do it one subject at a time, because she just couldn't do it. And we expect these people to be superhumans, and they're not. And then you get people like Scott Morrison, who, I'm sure he had his troubles growing up. I'm sure he did, occasionally. But that guy had a breezy existence compared to these people, and he doesn't get it. And the worst part about that, ignorance is not a problem in and of itself, as long as you're willing to be curious about what you don't know. And he is the opposite of curious, and it's maddening, because he has no desire to find out. Anyway, love you, Scott.
And we have another question from Victoria asking, can you talk a little bit what it's like to talk about poverty from within the queer community, to be LGBTQI+ and say openly, I'm poor or come from a poor background?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think, so I never found my queer community, and that was for a whole bunch of reasons. I think one of them was that I came to it late, and I felt like I missed the entry point, and then I didn't have the same level of kind of, I guess I was still dealing with some stuff. So like I moved to the Gold Coast, where I didn't know there was a queer community. There was one gay club called MPs, which was called, it stood for the meeting place. We had many fun times there. But it was not my theme in that sense. But I didn't know any other gay people except, a couple sprinkled around university. And so I just never found them. And when I did, I felt like I'd missed the boat, certainly on a cultural level, because I didn't understand the shibboleths and all the different ways of being and acting in that world. And I think there has definitely been a division I've noticed. I guess, I don't want to go too far into it, but like if you're from the queer community, particularly among gay men in Sydney, if you're from a wealthy background, it tends to be a bit more flashy, which again, not necessarily my style. And I found that difficult to bridge sometimes. But again, we're all kind of working out stuff from our backgrounds. And, in many cases, the emotional kind of degradation they felt from their families who were, sending them to the right schools and wanted them to have the right future with the right number of children, married to the right woman. Like that stuff is hard to deal with. And so they cope in different ways about covering up, I guess, some of the fissures emotionally. And I just kind of felt like I never quite gelled, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, because I'm I kind of just float around doing my thing. You'd think otherwise when I do hand gestures like this. But
and Susie asks, what is your definition of class in Australia?
I love this question because it's not just about money. So that's a big factor. Not having money to pay for things, such as housing and food, is a huge thing. But also culturally, if you're not part of, and I don't want to use the word elite, but if you're not part of the kind of in crowd, I guess, and I mean that in an Australia-wide sense. So in my case, I was white, rural, poor, which is a very particular breed of kind of poor person in my case, because not only did I not have money, but I also just didn't know anything about other cultures. Like I didn't eat any other foreign food apart from Chinese, which every country town had, until I was on the Gold Coast. And even then, it took me years to kind of learn about ways of being in the world that were different to my own. And I think that holds me back in the same way that it holds newly arrived migrants back if they are forced to be one way, but they want to hold on to where they've come from and they don't know how to make that kind of that happy balancing point somewhere in between. So like there's this kind of class that keeps people away from the institutions, I guess, that govern us socially, but also politically. Like I remember, like we watched Channel 9 News and only Channel 9 News. We watched the Today Show every morning. I grew up with Tracy and Steve, and like they were my access to the world. We never watched the ABC, ever. And I remember once that the Prime Minister, John Howard, came to our high school in Boonah State High School to open some kind of building that my brother was actually a part of building for like wood shop. And I remember seeing the ABC cameraman there and just going, oh, must suck to work for that network. Because I just had literally no idea. I'm like, look at this guy. He's got the oldest camera. Meanwhile, I'm going home to eat like bread and butter. And yeah, so I class to me is about all of those things and how they interact. Because for me, the hardest thing, apart from, actually no, the hardest thing still to this day is the kind of cultural cringe that I have about myself and the fact that I haven't read the right books. I didn't grow up in a house where we debated big ideas. We didn't even play board games. And I used to go on holidays, camping holidays with my friend's family every year, A, because they offered, but also because they played board games. And I wanted to be that kind of family. And so that to me is class.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all the audience questions we have for tonight. Thank you so much, Bridie and Rick, for joining us this evening. And thank you everyone for coming. Did you have any closing statements?
No, well, say hi to your mum for me.
It's definitely worth buying.
I couldn't bring myself to do that. I wasn't going to do that. Thank you everyone for coming. Like, honestly, I'm stoked. Like, I hope this feeling never gets old because it's cool as hell. And I have no chill. I've got zero chill. So I would smooch you all were COVID safe or physically possible.
I'm sure everyone at home is clapping too. Yay. No,
it's you. And you can buy Rick's wonderful book in-store or online with us. Please give it a read and enjoy it and love it. And thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.
We're going to go have dinner now.